A promise can sleep for years inside a silver locket, but it wakes the moment the wrong heart tries to forget. The locket opened at the very center of Ashford House, beneath 300 candles and the cold glitter of Duke Nathaniel Ashford's engagement ball. Emily Harper had not meant for anyone to see it. She had only bent to retrieve Lady Vanessa Crowell's fallen lace handkerchief from the polished floor, moving quickly and quietly as seamstresses were expected to move among people who wore their work but rarely knew their names. Her plain ivory gown, borrowed from the servant's wardrobe and altered with her own careful hands, whispered against the marble as she knelt. Then the fragile silver chain at her throat caught on a pearl bead sewn into Vanessa's train. The clasp snapped loose. The locket fell open. For one breathless second, the world narrowed to the little oval of tarnished silver lying against Emily's palm, and the folded scrap of paper inside it, yellowed at the edges, bearing the faded words of a boy who had once believed himself brave enough to keep them. "I will find you when I become a man." Emily closed her fingers too late. Across the ballroom, Duke Nathaniel Ashford had already seen it. He stood beside Lady Vanessa beneath an arch of white roses, tall and severe in black evening dress, his dark hair brushed back from a pale, aristocratic face that revealed almost nothing to the watching crowd. A moment earlier, every eye in the room had been waiting for his formal announcement, the elegant confirmation that Ashford's most powerful duke would marry the most admired lady of the season. But now his grey eyes were not on Vanessa. They were fixed on the trembling seamstress near the hem of her gown, and something in his expression shifted so sharply that even the candles seemed to lose their steadiness. Emily rose at once, lowering her gaze in apology. She could feel heat in her cheeks, though the ballroom was draughty and winter rain tapped against the tall windows like impatient fingers. "Forgive me, my lady," she whispered, offering the handkerchief back. Vanessa accepted it with a smile too smooth to be kind. Her blue eyes dropped to the silver locket Emily was trying to close. "How charming!" she said, softly enough to sound polite, loudly enough for those nearest to hear. "I did not know the sewing rooms had taken to wearing keepsakes fit for noble women." A few ladies turned. A murmur lifted, delicate and cruel as lace drawn tight. Emily's hand closed over the locket. She did not defend herself. She had learned long ago that some people mistook explanation for permission to wound again. Nathaniel took one step forward, then stopped. The movement was small, but it betrayed him. That locket. Those words. A sudden pressure moved behind his ribs, not memory exactly, but the shadow of one. Rain. Mud. A child's hand pulling him through darkness. A girl's voice humming to keep fear away. He could not see her face. He could only feel the ache of something lost before it had ever been understood. "Your Grace?" Vanessa's voice slipped through the air beside him, sweet and warning. The orchestra faltered, then recovered. Guests resumed breathing. Emily curtsied, the locket hidden beneath her palm, and stepped backward toward the servants' passage. She knew better than to remain where she did not belong. Yet, as she reached the shadowed doorway, she looked once toward Nathaniel, and for the first time in 14 years, the boy who had promised to find her looked back from behind the eyes of a man who had forgotten how. Emily Harper returned to the sewing rooms before the applause began. Behind her, the ballroom doors closed upon music, perfume, candlelight, and the life into which she had never been invited except by necessity. The narrow servants' corridor smelled of beeswax, damp wool, and extinguished lamp smoke. It was colder there, away from the chandeliers, but Emily welcomed the cold. It steadied her hands. She pressed her back against the paneled wall and opened her fingers slowly. The locket lay in her palm, its hinge slightly bent, the scrap of paper still tucked inside like a breath that had survived too long. "I will find you when I become a man." She did not need to read the words. They had lived beneath her heart for 14 years, closer than any prayer, more faithful than any person had been allowed to be. When she was a child, she had believed promises were things people carried carefully, like candles through wind. As she grew older, she learned that the wealthy often made them the way they accepted flowers, briefly warmed by the gesture, then set aside when the fragrance faded. Yet she had kept his. Not because she was foolish. Not because she expected a duke to remember a poor girl from a rain-dark road. She kept it because there had been one night in her life when someone had looked at her not as a servant's daughter, not as a pair of useful hands, but as a soul worth returning to. In the small room behind the sewing hall, Emily lit a single lamp and set the locket beside her work-basket. The space was scarcely wider than a pantry, with a narrow bed pushed beneath the slanted ceiling, a cracked mirror, 3 hooks for clothing, and a trunk containing everything she owned. Every morning before dawn, she rose there to wash in cold water, pin her brown hair neatly, and begin the day's work before the great house stirred. She mended torn lace for ladies who complained of the stitch, but never saw the eyes that made it. She let out gowns after winter indulgences, tightened bodices before spring balls, replaced pearl beads one by one until her fingertips ached. Her world was measured in thread, candle stubs, and quiet endurance. Still, every day, before fastening her plain collar, she placed the locket around her neck. It was not ornament. It was memory. A memory of rain hammering through pine branches, of a frightened boy no older than 12, lost on the Ashford road with mud on his boots and pride failing beneath fear. A memory of sharing her mother's bread, of wrapping his cold hands in a patched blanket, of hearing him whisper that he would not forget. The man in the ballroom had forgotten many things. Emily could see that now. Duke Nathaniel Ashford did not carry boyhood in his face. He carried duty, command, and a loneliness polished so finely society mistook it for strength. But for one moment, when his eyes found the locket, something old had moved in him. That was enough to hurt. She took up the bent clasp and reached for her smallest pliers. The sensible choice would have been to lock the necklace away before Lady Vanessa made trouble of it. But Emily had survived too many years by surrendering small treasures to the comfort of others. With careful fingers, she repaired the clasp, closed the locket, and fastened it again at her throat. If he had forgotten the promise, she would not force remembrance upon him. But neither would she pretend it had never existed. Outside the sewing room, the orchestra swelled, bright and distant. Emily threaded a needle with silver silk and bent over the torn hem of Lady Vanessa's engagement gown, while against her heart, the locket rested quietly, holding the boy Nathaniel had been, even as the Duke prepared to belong to someone else. 14 years earlier, before Ashford House became a palace of polished silence and Nathaniel Ashford became a duke whose name could still a room, there had been only rain. It came down hard over the northern road, drumming against pine branches, filling the wagon ruts with brown water, turning the world into a blur of mud, mist, and frightened breath. Emily had been 10 years old then, small for her age, with a patched shawl over her shoulders and a basket of late apples tucked against her hip. She was returning from the mill when she heard someone calling beyond the trees. Not loudly. Not bravely. Just a thin, stubborn sound trying not to become a cry. She followed it past the stone wall and found a boy standing near the ditch, soaked through, his fine coat torn at the sleeve, his dark hair plastered to his pale forehead. He looked at her with the injured pride of someone raised never to need help, and the wide gray eyes of someone who needed it desperately. "I am not lost," he said at once. Emily looked at the empty road, the deepening dusk, and the reins sliding off his nose. "Then you are doing a poor job of being found." The boy stared at her, startled, then laughed despite himself. It was the first warm sound in that cold evening. His name, he told her after some persuasion, was Nathaniel. He had ridden ahead of his uncle's carriage, certain he knew a shortcut through the Ashford woods. The shortcut had vanished, his pony had been found by a groom, and Nathaniel had been left with pride, wet boots, and no lantern. Emily did not scold him. Her mother had taught her that fear grew sharper when dressed in shame. She simply offered him half her shawl and said, "My cottage is less than a mile away. You may be grand again after you are dry." He tried to protest. His teeth chattered too hard to make dignity convincing. The cottage where Emily lived with her mother stood at the edge of Briar Glen, small and low-roofed, with smoke trembling from the chimney and thyme drying above the hearth. Her mother gave Nathaniel dry stockings, warm bread, and a chair close to the fire, asking no questions that might wound him. Emily sat on the braided rug nearby, peeling apples with a dull little knife while the boy watched the flames as though they had rescued him from more than rain. When thunder rolled over the roof, he flinched, then looked furious with himself for doing so. Emily pretended not to notice. Instead, she began to hum the old lullaby her mother sang on winter nights. Softly at first, then clearer. The melody filled the cottage, simple as candlelight. Nathaniel's shoulders eased. His hands stopped gripping the blanket. "What is that song?" he asked. "One for lost things," Emily said. "Does it find them?" "Sometimes." Near midnight, Ashford's servants arrived with lanterns and anxious voices. Nathaniel rose too quickly, suddenly a gentleman's son again, smoothing his borrowed blanket as if it had been a formal cloak. Yet before he left, he turned back to Emily. From beneath his collar, he drew a silver locket engraved with the Ashford crest, warm from his skin and shining faintly in the firelight. "Take it," he said. Emily shook her head. "I cannot take something like that." "You must. So I can come back for it." He found a scrap of paper on her mother's table and wrote with a pencil worn nearly to nothing. "I will find you when I become a man." Then he folded the promise into the locket, closed it, and pressed it into her palm. "When I am old enough, I will find you," he said, trying to sound solemn though his voice still belonged to a boy. Emily believed him because children still understand truth before the world teaches them its price. By morning, the carriage tracks were washed clean from the road. By winter, the cottage had grown colder. By the following year, the Ashford family's sorrow had swallowed Nathaniel into distant relatives, tutors, travel, and silence. But Emily kept the locket. Through hunger, work, grief, and every long season in which no one came looking, she kept it. Not because she expected rescue, but because once, in a rain-dark cottage, a frightened boy had been kind, and kindness, when given to the lonely, can become a promise stronger than gold. By dawn, the memory had faded from Nathaniel Ashford's mind as rain fades from stone, leaving only a faint mark where something living had once touched it. The year after that storm, Ashford House entered a season of mourning so deep that even the servants seemed to walk as though sound itself were improper. Nathaniel's parents were gone before spring returned, and the boy who had laughed in Emily Harper's cottage was placed under the care of relatives who believed tenderness was a weakness best corrected early. He was sent from Ashford House to distant schools, then abroad, then into the long, polished machinery of inheritance. Tutors taught him estate law, French, Latin, finance, writing, diplomacy, and the careful art of never revealing the place where grief had entered. No one taught him how to remember warmth without fearing it. Years reshaped him. The soft-handed boy became a young man with straight shoulders, measured speech, and a face society admired because it gave so little away. By 30, Duke Nathaniel Ashford could silence a room with a glance and settle a land dispute with one sentence. His ledgers were precise. His tenants were secure. His reputation was spotless, distant, and cold enough to be mistaken for strength. Women in drawing rooms called him fascinating. Older gentlemen called him disciplined. His aunt called him sensible. Nathaniel called it survival. Yet some part of him had never quite obeyed. Rain unsettled him. A certain old melody could make him pause in a corridor without knowing why. Silver caught in candlelight sometimes drew his eyes. Before he could stop himself, he kept no locket. He remembered no promise. But in dreams, always just before waking, he felt a small hand pulling him through mud and heard a girl's voice say, "You may be grand again after you are dry." He never saw her face. He would wake with an ache in his chest and bury it beneath correspondence before breakfast. That winter, when he returned permanently to Ashford House after years of travel, the estate greeted him with all the grandeur expected of his name: tall windows, black oak staircases, marble floors, and portraits of ancestors who seemed to judge even the dust. Lady Vanessa Crowell arrived soon after, not as a declared bride at first, but as a guest encouraged by every practical voice around him. She was beautiful, graceful, and properly born, with pale gold hair, a flawless smile, and the rare talent of saying only what a duke was expected to want to hear. Ashford needs a duchess, his aunt told him one evening as snow gathered on the terrace. Vanessa understands society. She understands duty. Nathaniel looked toward the window, where rain had begun to mix with the snow. Duty has never lacked understanding in this house. Then perhaps it is affection you require. He almost laughed. The sound never came. Affection is unreliable. So the engagement moved toward him as many things did, arranged by convenience, polished by expectation, accepted because refusal would require a reason he did not possess. He saw Emily Harper several times in those first weeks without truly seeing her. A quiet seamstress crossing the back hall with folded silk. A young woman kneeling beside a torn hem, her brown hair pinned beneath a plain cap. A pale face lowered in respectful silence whenever he passed. Once, in the East Gallery, he noticed the glint of silver at her throat and stopped so abruptly his valet nearly collided with him. Emily turned. The locket lay against her collar, small and old, nothing like the jeweled ornaments favored by the women upstairs. Nathaniel's breath caught. For one suspended second, the gallery smelled not of waxed floors and winter roses, but of wet pine, hearth smoke, and bread warmed by kind hands. "Your Grace?" she said softly. Her voice was calm, yet something beneath it trembled. He stared at the silver oval, waiting for memory to step fully into the light. It did not. Footsteps sounded behind him, and Lady Vanessa appeared with her usual effortless brightness. Her eyes flicked to Emily's necklace, then to Nathaniel's face. "How sweet," Vanessa said. "Those old trinkets are sold everywhere near the village markets. The lower staff grows sentimental over the simplest things." The moment broke. Nathaniel looked away, ashamed of an emotion he could not name. "Of course," he said. Emily lowered her eyes, and whatever door had almost opened between them closed without a sound. Lady Vanessa Crowell did not fear Emily Harper at first. A seamstress was too small a figure to trouble the path of a woman raised to expect silk, titles, and obedience. Emily entered rooms by side doors, stood behind chairs, carried pins between her lips, and vanished whenever her usefulness ended. She possessed no fortune, no family influence, no chaperone whose displeasure mattered. Yet after the night in the East Gallery, Vanessa began to watch her. She watched the way Nathaniel's gaze followed the glint of the silver locket before he remembered to look away. She watched the brief stillness that passed over him whenever Emily spoke in that soft, steady voice. She watched, most of all, the moment at the engagement ball when the locket opened and the color left his face as if some forgotten ghost had stepped between them. Vanessa was not foolish. She did not need the full truth to recognize danger. The next morning, she summoned Emily to her chamber under the pretense of final adjustments to the engagement gown. The room was warm with firelight and crowded with roses, jewel boxes, satin slippers, and the pale blue gown that had taken Emily 3 weeks to finish. Vanessa stood before the mirror, beautiful as winter sunlight on glass, while 2 ladies visiting from town lounged nearby with teacups and curious smiles. "Miss Harper," Vanessa said without turning, "I noticed your little necklace last night. It seemed to make quite an impression." Emily lowered her eyes and unfolded the measuring tape. "It is only an old keepsake, my lady. How devoted you are to old things." Vanessa's voice remained sweet. "Though one must be careful. Sentiment can appear rather presumptuous when worn above one's station." One of the ladies gave a soft laugh, then hid it behind her cup. Emily measured the hem with careful hands. Her face did not change, but the locket beneath her collar felt suddenly heavier, as though the paper inside had heard the insult. "I shall keep it hidden while I work, if it displeases you." "Displeases me?" Vanessa turned then, smiling. "Not at all. I simply worry for you. People may misunderstand. A servant girl wearing a nobleman's trinket invites questions she may not wish to answer." Emily's fingers paused for half a second. Not long enough for accusation. Long enough for Vanessa to notice. "It was given to me," Emily said quietly, "by someone who meant it kindly. Kindness is often mistaken by girls who have little else." The words were soft. That made them worse. Emily bent again to the hem, refusing the tremor that wanted to enter her hands. She had known hunger, cold rooms, unpaid wages, and the delicate cruelty of women who believed good breeding gave them permission to sharpen every syllable. She would not break because Lady Vanessa smiled with polished teeth. Yet when the door opened and Nathaniel entered unexpectedly, carrying a note from his aunt about the evening's announcement, Emily felt the room tighten around her. Vanessa stepped down from the fitting stool with graceful surprise. "Your Grace, forgive the chaos. Miss Harper was just showing us her keepsake. A touching little village treasure." Nathaniel's eyes moved at once to Emily's throat. The locket was half visible where her collar had shifted. Again, that strange stillness entered him. Rain against pine. A child's song. Warm bread broken in two. He took one step closer. "May I see it?" The request was quiet, almost involuntary. Emily looked up. For a heartbeat, the world held still. She could have opened the locket. She could have shown him the paper. She could have placed 14 years of faith in his hands and said, "You gave this to me before the world taught you to forget." But Vanessa's gaze rested on her like a warning, and behind Nathaniel stood every wall between a duke and a seamstress. Emily touched the locket once, then closed her fingers over it. "There is nothing worth troubling your Grace with." Something like disappointment crossed his face, though whether it was toward her or himself, she could not tell. Vanessa laughed lightly. "You see? Sentiment embarrasses the poor as much as it flatters them." Nathaniel's eyes sharpened at the cruelty, but Emily had already stepped back into the role expected of her. "The gown will be ready by evening, my lady," she said. She curtsied and left the room with her head lowered, carrying the secret still burning against her heart. Only in the corridor did she stop, pressing one hand to the wall until the stone cooled her palm. Inside the chamber, Vanessa's voice floated faintly through the door, bright and confident, guiding Nathaniel back toward duty. Emily closed her eyes. A promise kept alone begins to resemble a wound. And for the first time in 14 years, she wondered whether holding on had been an act of faith, or merely the gentlest way to hurt herself. That evening, the east corridor of Ashford House lay empty beneath the hush that comes before an announcement everyone pretends has not already been decided. Downstairs, footmen arranged champagne glasses, musicians tuned their instruments, and white roses were carried into the ballroom in silver buckets. Upstairs, Emily remained alone with Lady Vanessa's engagement gown, repairing a final loosened seam where the pearl beading met the pale blue satin. The sewing-room lamp burned low. Rain tapped steadily against the narrow window, not the fierce rain of childhood, but a patient winter rain that softened the edges of the world. Emily worked until her eyes ached. Each stitch entered the fabric with quiet precision, silver thread passing through satin like moonlight through water. When the gown was finished, she lifted it carefully over one arm and carried it through the servants' passage toward Vanessa's chamber. The house was larger after dark. Its portraits seemed more awake. Its long rugs swallowed. The sound of her steps. Near the east gallery, a draught moved through the corridor, and the candle in her hand shivered. Emily stopped beneath the arched window where rain drew crooked lines down the glass. She did not mean to sing. The melody rose from her before she could call it back, soft as breath, the old lullaby her mother had sung beside the cottage hearth. A song for lost things. The notes moved into the dark hall and lingered there, fragile and warm against the stone. At the far end of the corridor, Nathaniel Ashford stopped walking. He had been returning from his aunt's sitting room, where she had spoken for half an hour about contracts, family honor, and the proper timing of tomorrow's public notice. His mind had been full of obligations until the song touched him. Then everything inside him stilled. The corridor dissolved. Candlelight became hearth glow. Rain became thunder over a low roof. He smelled damp wool, pine smoke, bread warming near the fire. A girl's voice, clear and small, asking whether lost things could be found. His hand closed around the carved post of the gallery rail. "Sing it again," he said. Emily turned so quickly the candle almost went out. The blue gown slipped slightly over her arm. Nathaniel stood several yards away, pale beneath the dim gold light, his gray eyes no longer cold but searching, almost afraid. "Your Grace?" she whispered. "Forgive me. I did not know anyone was here." He took one step forward. "That song. Where did you learn it?" Her fingers tightened around the hanger. For 14 years she had imagined being asked a question that might open the past. Now that it had come, her courage felt strangely quiet. "From my mother." "Where did she learn it?" "I do not know." He looked at her throat. The locket rested there, its silver surface catching the candlelight. "You wore that the night of the ball?" "Yes." "And before that?" Emily lowered her gaze. "Every day." The answer struck him with a force he could not name. Every day. The words echoed through him, unlocking rooms he had left sealed in himself. A patched blanket. Apples in a basket. A girl telling him he could be grand again after he was dry. He pressed his fingers to his temple, not from pain, but from the pressure of memory returning in broken pieces. "I know that song," he said slowly. "I should not know it, but I do." Emily's breath caught. The locket felt warm against her skin, as if the paper inside had begun to live again. For one dangerous moment, she wanted to tell him everything. Not to claim him. Not to wound Vanessa. Only to lay down the burden of being the only person left who remembered. Then footsteps sounded from the stairwell. Lady Vanessa appeared, dressed in a white evening robe, her golden hair loose over her shoulders, her expression softening into surprise before sharpening into calculation. "Nathaniel," she said lightly. "There you are. Everyone is waiting downstairs." Her eyes moved to Emily, then to the gown, then to the locket. "Miss Harper, I believe my dress should have been delivered 10 minutes ago." Emily stepped back. Nathaniel did not move. "Vanessa, have you heard this song before?" Vanessa smiled. "A servant's tune? I am afraid not. Though I am sure Miss Harper has many charming village habits." The words were graceful. The dismissal beneath them was not. Nathaniel looked from Vanessa to Emily, and something inside him refused, for the first time, to be guided away. "Leave the gown," he said quietly. "I would like a word with Miss Harper." Emily's heart began to pound. Vanessa's smile remained, but the room chilled around it. "Of course," she said. "But do remember, Your Grace, some memories are best left in the rain where they belong." Then she turned and walked away, leaving behind the scent of roses and the first clear proof that she knew more than she had ever admitted. Nathaniel remained in the east corridor after Vanessa disappeared down the stairs, but the moment she left, Emily felt the danger of truth grow sharper, not safer. The rain continued its soft tapping against the arched window. The candle between them trembled. For a few seconds neither of them spoke, and in that silence Ashford House seemed to hold its breath around the two people who stood at opposite ends of a promise. Nathaniel looked at her, as though his own life had become a locked door, and she was the only person who might still possess the key. "Miss Harper," he said, his voice low. "What did Lady Vanessa mean?" Emily lowered her eyes to the blue gown draped over her arm. "I cannot speak for my lady." "Then speak for yourself." The request was not a command, but it carried the force of a man resisting everything he had been taught to ignore. Emily touched the locket with 2 fingers. She could feel the bent clasp beneath the chain, the small repair she had made with her own hands, the folded paper resting inside like a quiet pulse. "Some memories are dangerous when they belong to people who are not permitted to have them," she said. His face changed. Not fully. Not enough. But some old recognition moved behind his gray eyes, like light behind rain-clouded glass. "Did I know you?" he asked. Her heart answered before her mouth could. "Yes. In the rain. By the fire. Before grief turned you into a stranger wearing your own face." But she only said, "You were kind to me once." The words were too small for what they carried. Nathaniel took another step forward. "When?" Footsteps sounded again, this time from below, servants passing with trays, laughter rising from the ballroom, the waiting world calling him back to the engagement everyone expected. Emily heard it and understood, with a clarity that hurt less because it was final, that the past could not be dragged into the light by a seamstress in a dark corridor. If Nathaniel remembered, it had to be because truth found him, not because she placed herself beneath his pity. She curtsied, careful and low. "Your Grace, Lady Vanessa will need her gown." Before he could stop her, she moved past him and carried the dress to Vanessa's chamber. The room was empty when Emily entered. Roses crowded every table. A pearl comb lay beside the mirror. The air smelled of powder, perfume, and victory. Emily hung the gown on the wardrobe door, then felt for the locket at her throat. Her fingers closed on nothing. For one sickening moment, she could not breathe. She searched the collar of her dress, the folds of her apron, the floor beneath her feet. Nothing. The chain was gone. The locket was gone. Only a small red mark remained, where it had rested against her skin all day. She looked toward the dressing table and saw Vanessa's gloves lying there, one of them not quite flat, the shape beneath it too small to be a ring and too familiar to be mistaken. Emily reached for it, but the door opened before her hand could touch the glove. Vanessa entered slowly, smiling as though she had been expected. "Looking for something?" Emily drew back. "My locket, my lady." "Your locket?" Vanessa removed the glove from the table and lifted the silver oval between two fingers. "How bold possession sounds when spoken by someone who owns so little." Emily's face went pale, but her voice remained steady. "It was given to me. By the Duke, I suppose?" Vanessa's smile sharpened. "A childhood story. A secret promise. How touching. How inconvenient." Emily said nothing. Vanessa stepped closer, lowering her voice. "Listen carefully, Miss Harper. By tomorrow evening, I will be announced as the future Duchess of Ashford. You will not embarrass His Grace with village fantasies. You will not place some rain-soaked memory in the path of a marriage arranged by families, titles, and sense. If the memory means nothing," Emily said softly, "why are you afraid of it?" For the first time, Vanessa's expression faltered. Then it hardened into perfect calm. "Because men in grief can be sentimental, and sentiment ruins order." She placed the locket into her reticule and rang the bell. Within minutes, the housekeeper arrived, confused and troubled, while Vanessa spoke with graceful authority about misplaced property, impropriety, and the need for Miss Harper to leave Ashford House before dawn to prevent further discomfort. Emily did not defend herself. She had no witness the house would honor, no name strong enough to shield her. She packed her small trunk that night in the sewing room behind the hall, folding 2 dresses, her mother's thimble, and the last wages owed to her. When she touched her bare throat, the emptiness felt louder than any accusation. Near midnight, Nathaniel came to the sewing rooms and found them dark. On the table lay only a length of silver thread and a single scrap of torn paper, fallen from the mended clasp when Vanessa had taken it. He lifted it to the lamp. The words were incomplete, faded, and written in the uneven hand of a boy. "When I become." His breath stopped. Somewhere deep in the house, a clock struck 12, and the promise he had forgotten began, at last, to remember him. Nathaniel stood alone in the dark sewing room with the torn scrap of paper between his fingers, and for the first time in many years, the past did not come to him as a shadow. It came as rain. It came as pine branches bending under storm wind, as mud pulling at polished boots, as a cottage door opening to firelight, as a small girl with serious eyes telling him he could be grand again after he was dry. He gripped the edge of the worktable until the old wood pressed hard into his palm. The words on the scrap blurred, then steadied. "When I become." He knew the rest before he found it. He knew it in the sudden ache beneath his ribs, in the song still haunting the east corridor, in the silver locket he had seen against Emily Harper's throat and refused to understand because understanding would have undone the life others had built around him. He left the sewing room without calling for a servant. The house slept uneasily around him, its marble corridors washed in thin moonlight, its portraits watching from their frames like witnesses too proud to speak. He went first to the east gallery, then to the old nursery wing, then at last to the locked stair leading to the North Tower, where the belongings of his childhood had been stored after his parents died. The key resisted from disuse. Dust breathed out when the door opened. Inside, beneath sloped beams and a narrow window silvered by rain, stood trunks, broken rocking horses, covered portraits, and boxes tied with faded ribbon. Nathaniel searched them with hands no longer careful of dignity. He found schoolbooks. A wooden soldier. A writing crop too small for any man. Letters from tutors praising discipline in a boy who had not yet learned the cost of it. Then, at the bottom of a cedar chest, he found a flat tin box marked in his mother's handwriting, Nathaniel, age 12. His breath caught before he opened it. Inside lay a pressed apple leaf, a pencil worn almost to nothing, and a folded page brittle with age. He opened it slowly. The torn edge matched the scrap from Emily's table. The handwriting was his own, uneven, earnest, unmistakably young. I will find you when I become a man. Beneath the words, in the corner of the page, was a crude sketch of a cottage hearth and a girl seated beside it, her hair loose over her shoulders, her hand extended toward a frightened boy holding a blanket around himself like a borrowed shield. Nathaniel sat back on his heels. The cold floor beneath him, the rain beyond the tower window, the silence of the house, all of it seemed to fall away. Emily. Not a servant's fancy. Not a village trinket. Not a sentimental misunderstanding. Emily Harper had been the girl who found him when he was lost, the child who gave him bread, warmth, and a song before grief sealed every tender room inside him. She had worn his promise every day while he became a man who forgot making it. By dawn, Nathaniel had sent for no one except the old housekeeper. Mrs. Bell came to the tower wrapped in a shawl, her gray hair braided, her eyes sharp with concern. He showed her the page. He showed her the scrap. He said Emily's name, and the housekeeper's face softened with a sorrow that told him she had known enough to pity the truth, if not enough to stop it. "Where is she?" he asked. "She was told to take the early coach from Briar Glen Station, Your Grace." "By whose order?" Mrs. Bell hesitated. "Lady Vanessa said it was for the peace of the house." Nathaniel closed his eyes for one measured second. When he opened them, the cold command that had once ruled Ashford House had returned, but now it served something cleaner than pride. "No announcement will be made today." Mrs. Bell bowed her head. "Yes, Your Grace." "And Lady Vanessa is not to leave with anything belonging to Miss Harper." By the time Vanessa descended in pale blue silk, expecting music, guests, and triumph, Nathaniel was waiting in the morning room with the tin box on the table before him. The silver locket lay beside it, retrieved from her reticule by a maid too honest to be frightened forever. Vanessa's face did not change at first. Then she saw the paper. "Nathaniel," she began softly. "Do not," he said. The word was quiet, but it ended the engagement more completely than shouting could have. He touched the locket once, gently, as if asking forgiveness from the object itself. "You tried to bury a memory that was not yours to judge." Vanessa lifted her chin, pride gathering around her like armor. "I tried to protect your future." "No," he said. "You tried to choose which parts of my heart were worthy of belonging to me." He left her there among the untouched roses and went out into the rain without his formal coat, carrying the locket, the paper, and the terrible knowledge that Emily had remembered him long after he had forgotten himself. Nathaniel reached Briar Glen Station just as the morning coach was preparing to leave. Rain silvered the platform roof and turned the road beyond it into a shining ribbon of mud. Horses shifted beneath their harnesses. A porter called for final trunks. Travelers gathered beneath umbrellas, faces blurred by weather and haste. For one terrible moment, Nathaniel did not see her. Then the crowd parted, and there she was near the far end of the platform, small trunk at her feet, plain cloak darkened by rain, bare throat visible above her collar where the locket had rested for 14 years. Emily looked not dramatic, not broken, but quietly emptied, as though the last candle in a familiar room had finally gone out. He stopped several feet away. Every instinct trained into him by title and command urged him to speak quickly, to explain, to repair the damage before it became permanent. But the girl who had once pulled him through the storm had become a woman who deserved more than his urgency. She deserved his truth, offered without expectation. "Miss Harper," he said. Emily turned. At the sight of him, something passed through her face, surprise first, then caution, then a gentleness she tried hard to hide. "Your Grace," she replied. The formal address hurt, because he had earned it. Nathaniel removed his hat despite the rain and bowed his head. "I found the rest of the paper." Her fingers tightened around the handle of her trunk. He opened his hand. The silver locket lay there, cleaned of rain but still old, still slightly bent at the clasp she had repaired herself. Beside it was the folded page from the tower chest. Emily stared at them as if seeing not objects, but years of her own life returned to her in public, fragile and exposed. "Lady Vanessa had no right to take it," he said. "Neither did I, by forgetting what it meant." Emily looked toward the waiting coach. "You remembered now." There was no accusation in her voice. That made the words heavier. "Almost too late." "Too late for what, Your Grace?" The question was quiet, but it held the dignity of every day she had worn his promise without using it to claim him. Nathaniel drew a breath, and for once he did not hide the uncertainty that entered with it. "Too late to honor the boy who gave it to you. Too late to spare you the pain of carrying alone what I should have protected. Perhaps too late to ask anything of you at all." Rain dripped from the edge of the platform roof between them. He held out the locket, not as proof, not as a plea, but as something that had always belonged to her choice. "You remembered the promise," he said. "I forgot the boy who made it." Emily took the locket slowly. When the silver touched her palm, her composure trembled for the first time. Nathaniel saw it and hated, with a clean and humbling sorrow, every year in which she had stood beneath his roof as a stranger, while his own handwriting rested against her heart. "I will not ask you to stay because of what I said when I was 12, he continued. "A child's promise should not become a woman's chain. I only ask for the chance to become the kind of man who would not have needed a locket to recognize kindness." Emily closed the locket, but did not fasten it around her neck. The gesture was small. He understood it completely. Trust could not be restored like jewelry. It had to be remade. The coachman called again. Emily glanced toward the open door, then back at Nathaniel. Behind his pale face and rain-dark coat, she could see no command, no entitlement, no polished courtship offered to erase embarrassment. She saw grief, yes, but also humility. And humility was the first honest thing title had not taught him. "If I remain," she said, "it will not be in the sewing rooms. No, it will not be hidden in corridors while others decide which truths are acceptable. Never again. And you will not make my memory into a romance simply because you dislike your guilt." Nathaniel bowed his head. "Then teach me how to remember rightly." The coach departed without her. Its wheels rolled through the rain, carrying away the life she had almost chosen because hope had become too heavy to hold. Emily stood beside him in the soft gray morning, the locket closed in her hand, the folded promise between them. She did not forgive him that day. She did not love him again because he arrived in the rain with sorrow in his eyes. But she allowed him to walk beside her back toward Briar Glen, not too close, not too far, while the storm faded over the fields. In the months that followed, Nathaniel kept no grand declarations. He began with smaller things. He learned the names of the women in the sewing rooms. He restored Emily's mother's cottage and placed it in her name. He ended the engagement with Vanessa publicly but without cruelty, for even justice need not be unkind to be firm. Most of all, he listened when Emily spoke, and when rain fell over Ashford House, he no longer closed the windows against it. He let the sound remind him. Years later, when Emily wore the locket again, it was not because she had waited long enough to be chosen. It was because Nathaniel had learned that love is not proven by remembering a promise only when loss draws near. Love is proven by becoming the person who can keep it after the rain has passed.